Today we're going to talk about the importance of intelligently designing your office space. In particular, we're going to look at the cost to a tenant of poorly designing your space and wasting even a single square foot of office space. Brokers often will argue that they have some competitive advantage in terms of negotiating a lower square foot rate or more free rent or better TIs. But one of the things that's often overlooked is that we can often create real value for our clients by helping them to be more efficient. The following is an excerpt from a CLE which we teach around the country entitled Dollars and Cents in Office Leasing. So starting from the premise that a penny saved is a penny earned, let's break down exactly what it costs to inefficiently use office space. So let's start with some basic assumptions. First, let's assume we're talking about Class A buildings. We're talking about a full floor law firm. Let's assume that the law firm has a pretty standard ratio of partners to associates and that the design of the space is pretty typical relative to other law firms. Finally, because this is a large lease being a full floor, let's assume that the tenant will sign a 10-year lease. In order to complete our analysis, we have to determine what rents the tenant's actually paying. Because we give this CLE around the country, we decided to break the country up into sort of three broad price ranges. We have inexpensive markets. Examples of that would be Phoenix, Baltimore, Atlanta. We have mid-price markets, which would include San Diego, Washington, D.C., and Miami. And we have the more expensive markets. Examples of that are San Francisco and New York City. It should also be remembered that we are not looking at the most expensive nor the cheapest buildings in these markets. We're trying to get an average. Finally, these rates are sort of the after the negotiations are completed versus the asking rate for the building. So based on the market you're in, you can see that you can be paying $25 or $35 or $60 for every single square foot of space that you waste. That's what the layman thinks, and that's certainly what the landlord and the landlord's broker want you to think. But really, that's just the tip of the iceberg. It's the absolute wrong way to look at this problem. So let's take a look at it further and break it down even more to see what the true costs of wasting office space are. So the first thing that you have to consider is the term of the lease. If you're wasting 1 square foot of office space, then it costs you $25 a year, but you sign a 10-year lease, then it would seem to me to be fair to say the cost to waste that space is the cost for the space for the 10 years that you lease it. In addition to that, what about rent escalations? Very seldom do leases have flat rental rates. Typically, there's a negotiated escalation that goes in. For the sake of conversation, let's assume that those escalations in this analysis are 3% per year. So when you calculate in the term and the rent escalations, the amount of money you're wasting now looks something like this. So hopefully this has got your attention. Now all of a sudden you're looking at wasting significant amounts of money every single time you waste an individual square foot of office space. Unfortunately, even that doesn't tell the whole story. There's another area of expense which is invisible at first, but especially in a 10-year lease really adds up over time, and that's the cost of pass-throughs. Without getting too into the minutia of office leasing and office leasing costs, the truth is it costs money to operate an office building, and typically some portion of those costs are passed through to the tenants. Often the landlord will pay the first year's expenses and the tenant will pay the increases, but those increases accumulated over time. Here's a look of what it costs to run a typical building in Manhattan on a per square foot basis. Obviously Manhattan is the most expensive market in the country. Your market will be less, but it's not an insignificant amount of money. So here we see an analysis of pass-through expenses in the various markets that we're considering. So let's look at a mid-price market, San Diego, DC, or Miami, for example. The cost to run that building might be $11 a foot. And the landlord will agree to pay that $11, not only the first year, but every year subsequent. However, they will not pay typically the increases. So if you assume 3% increases in year 2, the pass-through cost or the operating cost will be $11.33, of which the tenant's responsible for 33 cents. You run that through for the full 10 years, you see that the total operating costs would be $126.10. The landlord agrees to pay the first $110, which means you're paying $16.10 per square foot in pass-throughs. And of course, if you've wasted that square foot, that's another $16.10 in wasted revenue, wasted profits. So you might think that at that point that we were done, that we've covered the costs of wasting square footage. However, the problem is there's another area of concern, and that area is called common areas. You see, every office building has a portion of their space that the landlord has to heat and cool, had to pay to build, has to clean, but they can't collect rent on. Those areas are called common areas. Common areas are comprised of, for example, lobbies, hallways, restrooms, janitor's closets. Again, anything that is there for the benefit of the tenant, but which the landlord can't charge rent to any specific tenant. And typically what happens is the landlord takes the amount of space that you actually occupy, they figure out the amount of the building that is common areas, and they add that number onto your rents. So in a typical full floor tenant, those common areas might be 9%, which means when you waste a single square foot of office space, you're actually wasting the 1 square foot you actually waste, plus the 9% of the space that the building's going to tack on as their common area charges. Here's a look at how that 9% further affects the cost of wasting a single square foot of office space. Another area of concern, which most laymen overlook, but which most architects would tell you is legitimate, is the idea of circulation. You see, when most tenants are designing their space and thinking about their needs, they tend to define the areas that they plan on using. So they tend to look at how big their offices should be, how many people the conference rooms seat, how many cubes they need and what sizes those cubes should be. What most people don't consider is the area of circulation. And here you can see in red the portion of a typical floor plan, which is circulation. Circulation is really defined as the area that's required to get from the front door of your suite to the furthest reaches of your suite. Circulation factor can vary pretty significantly from business use to business use, from floor plan to floor plan, from building design to building design. Even things like statutes revolving around fire codes can alter how much circulation a tenant will need. However, generally speaking, a well-designed, efficient law firm type use will have a circulation factor in the area of 24%. So you take the previously calculated number, you add 24% on for circulation, and depending on what part of the country your office is, you now have a complete look at what it costs when you waste a single square foot of office space, assuming that you're going to have that space for the next 10 years. So to recap, if you're in a relatively low-cost market like Phoenix or Baltimore or Atlanta, you're probably paying $25 a foot. In San Diego or Washington, D.C., Miami, it might be $35, and in San Francisco or New York, it might be $60 a foot. When you consider a 10-year term, you add in escalations and pass-throughs, you include a calculation for load factor and circulation factor, you see the total cost for wasting even a single square foot of office space is $405 a foot in the low-cost market, $565 a foot in a middle-price market, and almost $1,000 a foot in a high-price market. So how easy is it to save a single square foot through intelligent design? Well, let's take an imaginary case. Let's say you have a law firm with 20 partners and associates. Throw in some admin. Let's say that firm has 25 offices. If those offices are 15 by 15 square feet, that's 225 square feet per office, or 5,600 square feet. As you get more intelligent about your design, and a lot of this can be done through furniture and modern technology, you can shrink the size of those offices pretty easily. A 12 by 12 office is today a very large office. And by doing that, you save almost 2,000 square feet. That's $1 million in savings in even the lowest price market. And you couldn't go as low as 10 by 12 or 10 by 10 offices and create really significant savings for your firm. It's really just a matter of understanding the costs associated with not being frugal and not being intelligent, which will motivate your decision in terms of what exact office sizes you want to give your firm. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this. My name is James Robinson. I'm from the Avocot Group. While this is an excerpt from a CLE, I want to remind you CLEs are not our day job. We're a national commercial real estate brokerage. We only represent tenants. We have a significant practice dedicated to the representation of large law firms. We also represent local firms in our own markets if they have a lease expiring, as well as firms with a portfolio of more than 10 locations, either in a local market or nationally. Finally, I'm available for expert witness work. If you have an interest in that, please contact me. My information is here. Thank you very much for your time.